So I'll just, sorry, I had a note here. Okay, I think the main issue was whether or not, you know, the cost savings that had been identified in Bells Creek are actual savings, or whether we're deferring anything. Is the Bells Creek project affected in any way, shape or form? Yeah, it's all of those questions, you know. Yeah, so I'll leave that to you.
Okay, thank you very much. Well, obviously it's disappointing to have to come to you today to say that the Dudley Creek project is forecast to run over budget. At the same time, I've been very pleased that we have met our objectives in terms of reducing flood risk in a timely fashion. The forecast now is $2.2 million over, and obviously to complete the project in regards St Albans Creek and Shirley Stream, we do require the additional funding in order to meet those obligations. Overall, whilst this is a very large amount of money in absolute terms, it is less than 5% of the overall budget. The overspend on this, the proposal is to find the funding from savings within the land drainage recovery programme. The project that we identified for those savings is Bells Creek. Bells Creek, if I can just be clear, so the project is well advanced and substantially completed at the moment. However, there was money set aside for a second phase, as there's a second flood risk area within that catchment. What we've identified is that second area is largely, well, almost exclusively commercial, and would require, in all likelihood, a pump station in something in excess of $6 or $7 million. The budget we have remaining in terms of saving for meeting the land drainage recovery programme objectives is in the order of $2 million. So what we'd having previously discussed this with the working group, we suggested that we would, in completing the citywide model, we would identify, when we've done that, all the commercial areas at flood risk across the city, so that we could identify what would be required and how much that would cost, and so that could be presented to council in terms of priorities. At the moment, commercial properties at flood risk, we don't have obligations to meet those flood risks. That falls on the commercial owners and operators. So that would require change in council's policies and levels of service, and if met from the land drainage recovery programme, would require prioritisation against schemes we're putting forward with residential above flood risk. So that would become a future decision for council to make. So in identifying this saving in Bells Creek, this would have no impact upon that immediate proposal, and as and when we're able to come back to council, that would then give an opportunity, if that's decided by council to proceed, then we would probably budget for that at that time.
So why was it included in the residential drainage program when it was a commercial area, and you knew that right from the get-go?
We didn't fully appreciate that at that stage. When the investigation was carried out and looked at the areas, it did identify a second flood area, and when that was interrogated and analysed and modelled down, that's when we identified that as being largely commercial and street flooding and around that area. So it was in terms of the scope, it didn't meet the initial scope, and that's why we separated it into a second phase in order to understand what other commercial at-risk properties there are across the city.
So you knew at that point that it didn't meet the scope, but it remained in the program throughout in your plan process?
Yes, we had anticipated by this stage we would have the citywide model in place, and that we would have been able to identify all those properties across the city. We're not quite at that point just yet, and so on that basis we don't feel that we could expect to reasonably get agreement and commit to spend against that money next financial year, in financial year 19. So in that sense, if we continue as it is, we would have budget next year against Bells Creek that we wouldn't spend against. So this would be an opportunity to use that unspent money to fund this overspend on Dudley Creek, and then as and when we get further down the line, we'll be able to bring a report to council for that secondary stage in Bells Creek.
I think you're not getting my drift,
which
is if you knew this months ago, why didn't you take it out of the budget for the annual plan that we've just done?
Well, the annual plan only deals with the current year. This is for next financial year. The funding is from next year to bring it back. So the annual plan couldn't change that.
All right. Okay. Dion, then Yanni.
So what exact area are you talking about? The commercial area?
It's around Fitzgerald Avenue.
Around where?
Fitzgerald Avenue.
Fitzgerald Avenue. Which part of Fitzgerald Avenue?
Sorry, I might have to get the map up to have a look at that. Sorry, Councillor Johansson, you might save me a look up. You're familiar with this.
I've got the map, and the area that's mentioned is Morehouse Ave.
Which council paper are you looking at, Yanni?
This is the Bells Creek information on the council website, and it just makes reference to further investigations underway to identify options for reducing flood risk in Morehouse Ave, Ferry Road, Mackenzie Ave and Tabbert Street, and that's areas listed as stage 2. So we've also had, and I was going to ask a clarification around the area as well, because I know we've had Chewham Street and Fitzgerald, and Duke Street has been an issue.
So I think Chewham and Fitzgerald.
That was the area
was the area where most of the above floor flooding is occurring, and that's occurring on commercial properties. Yeah,
and that's when I think the Mayor's office was contacted about as well, 2 years ago, and a number of us as local councillors were contacted as well.
So the question I had was, where is that type of information around that commercial isn't actually, we're not protecting commercial? I mean, that's the first I've heard about it.
That's not what he meant.
Well, I mean, we're prioritising it because, I mean, they're still ratepayers.
Yeah, no, but I didn't know that. We're doing the entire land drainage recovery program based on priorities. This is so weird. Residential is the priority.
So we're happy to come back in future with a report identifying all the commercial at-risk properties across the city once we're fully aware of that, and together with a proposal and recommendations as to how you might consider that.
I'm just really concerned that there's constituents who have contacted us who were given undertakings that work would be done in certain areas. I mean, I don't want to hold up the Dudley Creek. I mean, I just worry about taking money from Bells Creek Stage 2 without getting a really good explanation about what the risks are and what work we could look at doing in the short term to address some of that stuff, or whether we can make a call around the priority. But at the moment, I don't understand how we can make a priority decision without that information. But I'd be very reluctant to take that money off.
So this is to protect residential, the one that we've got in front of us.
Yeah, so the land drainage recovery programme is to protect residential, and Dudley Creek, that's what it seeks to do.
But how many houses are now exposed if we didn't do this?
In this proposal for Dudley Creek. So we've started works in St Albans Creek and Shirley Stream. So the commitment has already been made to commence those works. We have done that. This funding is to complete those works. So if we just stop work now, then there would be we'd have to close down, shut down the sites, and we'd leave the works unfinished.
When did you know that it was going to be over budget by 2.2 million?
So it was very recently we understood that it went above budget. What we have is a very complex, a large and complex budget where we've been working in different work packages which have been running in parallel and overlapping with each other. So the work packages have been started and commenced within budget, but the work packages that have already been advanced, we've had some variations and some cost increases with those, so they've come in as we've been progressing other packages. We've been working on up to, I think it's 6 fronts at any one time at its maximum, and sort of managing these together. We've been able to do that within the budget overall and within the contingency, but it's only very recently that we've understood that our forecast has taken us above. I just point out we have not overspent yet. We are still underspent. This is the forecasting for the remaining works that we have that take it over budget.
Sarah, Jimmy.
I'm just wondering, I mean, I know that there are clearly a few time pressures and stuff on this, but I'm wondering why it hasn't actually come through the ITE committee.
So so we did report the overspend to the ITE committee, I think the meeting before last, and the late session. Yep.
Jimmy?
Okay. You mentioned earlier, respond to the mayor's mention, $2.2 million is a forecast.
Yes.
Yeah, but at the moment is underspent. But if this 2.2 million is not sufficient, if later on, how to mitigate this effect?
So we've been working very hard to find savings in the remaining works and to keep the cost down. The 2.2 million forecast overspend does include some contingency in itself, so we expect that we will be able to keep within this new budget figure.
Thank you.
Dion?
Well, I think that was partly what I was going to ask. Is what was the contingency budget for this project?
So the contingency when originally set was something in the order of about 10%. That was a little bit lower than it would normally be, but at the time we'd gone through several stages of council reports while we were still developing the downstream options, and the figure that we'd originally anticipated, we believed that we could work within that. So we've held to the original budget as set, and if we hadn't had these late changes and variances come through, we were expecting that we would have kept within budget.
So the original budget without contingency would have been 45 million-ish?
Without contingency, about that, yes.
And so you've already used up the entire budget, and now you're starting to go into contingency already.
Yes.
Effectively.
Yes.
And you're asking for another 2.2 on top of the contingency for
Yes.
this particular project.
Yes, correct.
On a project this size and this complexity, because you're going into a brownfield scenario, you're not a greenfield scenario. We are living in areas where we've got live streams, we've got earthworks that we don't actually know all the details. A 15% contingency on a program like that would not be unnormal or unrealistic. We were going through a lot of very big developed properties. Sarah, maybe coming back to your questions about why I didn't come to ITI, the main decision-making body who approved this contract was council. So that's why we've brought the variation back to council, because you approved this contract. So we believe you're the right body to do that. We are trying, obviously, to fast track it as fast as we can. We've got contractors on site. We would rather try and see if we can get this through rather than put a delay in proceedings and going through. So one of the things when we draw down from the land drainage program or any program, we try and keep as much contingency in the program bucket rather than in the project bucket, because all of a sudden you could maybe, by keeping the contingency centralised, you may get another project that's able to go ahead, and so it helps you to give that delivery time. If I drew down 15% to all of those projects, and I don't know how many land drainage projects I've got running at the moment, basically it would actually lock up quite a bit of funding, and it would give us a lot less, make us less nimble. And so in programs we try and hold that contingency back.
Yeah,
and we will get changes that will actually, at the end of a project, put some of those contingencies back in to the program that will be available for future projects.
But why was that not? But what my point is that I think that the ratepayers deserve to know exactly how much these projects are going to cost within the contingency at the time that they're scoped out. And I think it's really difficult for people, especially with the pressures that we're under at the moment, to sort of keep coming back and saying we've got to get another $2.2 million on top of the contingency that was already in the budget. At the time that you made the budget, you should have said that we need more contingency or something along those lines. That's my big problem here.
And we could certainly do that, but it would mean that we would do a full design, and we'd get that full design costed, which would slow the whole process down. And we could do a traditional design and build, but what we're doing in most of our contracts is what we call early contract involvement, so that we can look and actually try and bring in innovation into it. And with innovation, you are sharing some of that risk. But I would say if I went and did that traditional thing, I would probably come back to you with a figure which would be another 5 or 10 million on top of what you were doing, because we would have had to design the thing right to the nth degree, then get it priced and come back to you with a lump sum price. And I don't think that would be good for the ratepayers or good for basically delivering this program as quickly as we possibly can. And some people will be saying it's not quick enough, really.
Glenn?
No,
Vicky?
I got one more question.
Okay. Oh, right. Glenn?
Thank you. Just kind of on that, David, bullet point 2 under 5.8, it looks like, did Skirt scope it out, which I imagine included the contingency? And we, of course, were part of Skirt through the client governance group, but in effect they were delegated this project along with hundreds. So did the actual financial scoping it, that was conducted by them. So I guess that's how it reads. This was delivered by Skirt on behalf of council, but was fully funded by the Dudley Creek project.
There are a few projects that went through Skirt because they were working in the area, and it made sense to, instead of having two contractors working in, and so there were some projects that we gave to Skirt as part of our land drainage because they're the best. This was part of one of those projects. Obviously they have different structures of costings and overheads, and so there was part of this program. If you remember the way we did it, we came to you and we let Downers as a lead contract, but we did say that we were going to give it to them in little bits of stages as we developed the program. So to get things going, we started, and I can't remember what the first package was, 2 million, 7 million or something like that, and they were being given to try and accelerate the program. In the meantime, we also gave a little bit to Skirt because they must have been doing a water main or a sewer main, the big, can't remember what it was called, down that, and it was just logical for them to do that part of the program.
A lot of works down there. So so I guess the contingency really rested with them at the time?
No, they got a section of work to do.
Okay.
That got charged 100% back to us because the Crown wouldn't say it's not part of, they're saying the land drainage program's not part of earthquake. I would argue that why we're doing it is because of earthquake, but they'd made it ineligible, but it made sense for us to do the two together, and it was a benefit. However, that was part of the extras that they that did get added in, so there was a component. Skirt work on a base cost, which is very transparent, and then a Lim 1, Lim 2, Lim 3 on top of that. So the Lim 1 is around overheads, Lim 2 is around profit, but it's all very, very transparent. So, yeah.
So, Yanni and then Dion.
So just going back to Bells Creek, I've got two questions about stage 1 and stage 2. I'll start with, I think, a more simple one, which is the stage 2, which is there's a huge residential area in that, but you've just talked about the commercial. So the residential area from Tabbert Street, Mackenzie Ave, back from the Heathcote, which a number of us have seen the Facebook comments when it flooded in the most recent flooding events. Is that area still being addressed through other projects, or is that part of stage 2? Because in the map that we've got, that's part of stage 2.
I'd have to check on that, I'm afraid, to check the scope of that. But what we do is we have a number of catchment areas, so all the city is covered in certain catchments. Okay. This, the second stage of Bells Creek, particularly refers to the necessary pump station that would be required for around the Chum Street, Fitzgerald Avenue area. But we are picking up other areas within other projects that we'll work through. Land Drainage Recovery Programme is a very large programme that will, span several decades, and it's as we get the knowledge and understanding, we'll be helping you to prioritise.
In regards to stage 2, if some of us were concerned until we get further information in terms of allocating money from that to this project, is there any other budget or program that we could take that money from so that Dudley Creek isn't stopped, but actually continues? There is, but that would require us taking money from this year for projects such as the line drains repairs and other works such as that. Dudley tributaries, we have some funding in that. So there's others that we can call upon, but that's potentially going to impact upon their programmes at this stage. So we do have this as an identified saving against next year. We wouldn't be expecting to spend against it next year. I note your point about not wanting to lose its place in priority, but we need to see how it fits in with everything else, and we're happy to report back on that.
Well, the residential side, I think, I mean, it probably would have been useful just to have a little bit more detail about what was coming out, rather than just what it was, just identifying it as savings, because that's what I've struggled with in terms of the paper, is understanding what isn't proceeding. Is it worthwhile noting that as part of stage 2 of the the resolutions don't even indicate where it's come from, so that as part of stage 2 of the Bells Creek work or program, that was it a pumping station?
We expect at this stage it would be a pumping station, in which case that would far exceed the available budget in any regard. So it's not really a saving. You've identified. It's a saving against committed Bells Creek works as we have it. The scope of the brief we have is to return that Bells Creek catchment to pre-quake levels of flood risk, with the prioritised based upon above floor residential flooding. Because that area now we've investigated it doesn't include it, we've shown it as a stage 2, but effectively it doesn't fit within the scope of the work, which is why we're identifying it as a saving in that regard. I think that it almost needs to be put forward as a new project in its own right because of the nature of it. And that's something in discussion with the working group, we said that we would look at all the commercial risk across the city in order to consider those priorities. Yeah,
but all it says is a dot point. The additional spend is to be met from savings that have been identified in the Bells Creek project. The money is currently budgeted for a spend in FY19 and will need to be brought back into FY18.
Yes.
It makes it sound as if there were savings to an existing project, but that's not what we're hearing. What you've identified is that within the further investigation work that you've done into the project, you've discovered that a significant overspend would occur in an area that's not authorised by the program.
It would be an overspend if council decided to progress with that option.
But you haven't got the authority to progress with it, because we have not included non-residential in it. But I guess Yanni's question is there any residential included in it? And the Chum Street intersection is the one that several people have emailed about. Well, then you've got a conflict of interest. So
Stage 1 we are going to deliver for the 18 million, and that's all done. It's all, well, not all done, but it's all at contract and long way right through delivery. Stage 2 we weren't going to be able to deliver for 2 million anyway, and so we need to come back to you with a report about what is that whole stage once we've scoped that whole thing out. I agree, look, Durham Street's, ever since I've been here, I've probably, every time it rains over about 5 mils, I know there's a big flat area that we need to do. We need to address it equally as part of the roadworks in that area, and so we will have to come back. Two things about what part of stage 2 is legitimate under the land drainage program policies and what would make sense if we extend it, because that Durham Street is kind of, it drains in 4 different directions, my understanding. It's like a catchment, it's like a watershed catchment sort of area, so it's just got no natural outlet, so it's not it's a tricky one.
Yeah, but the thing for me is that I really like, when I'm reading back on a resolution, to understand exactly what we decided. And this resolution doesn't indicate where the cost is being transferred from within the program or why. So I really would just like some words that, like a new 3, that just basically note that the, I mean, I don't know the exact words myself, but it's that an amount was allocated to the budget for stage 2 Bells Creek, that this isn't required for the protection in the area, that therefore this sum of money won't be required, that if it is required, then it will require a new decision of council, and to bring the money forward in the meantime in the budget and get on with this. So I just rather that it was very explicit about what we are actually deciding, because at the moment it's completely bereft of context and you can't see it in the paper. Sarah.
So the stage 1 question just quickly is, I understand that there's possibly a necessary overspend and contingency needed for that project, and I just wanted to make sure that you think we've got sufficient budget if that project is slightly behind time and it's become more complex. This is just the stage 1 Bells Creek. Have you got funding available to get that complete on time and to the scope that you expect?
So stage 1 Bells Creek, yes, we have, that leaves sufficient funding to complete.
No, it's funding, it's already there, it's just contingency still that they've got available.
Yeah. At the moment there's $2 million more budget than will be required against Bells Creek.
Stage 1.
Well, against Bells Creek, we've identified stage 1 and stage 2 for our own purposes and used to separate them. But in terms of what council have signed off on, that is effectively what we refer to as stage 1. Stage 2 hasn't had a council agreement to progress at that point. It was just Bells Creek. Council have signed off on Bells Creek, and the report that you've seen refers to the pump station and the Lower Fields Parks. That's what council have signed off on.
Sarah?
Thanks. I think it's interesting to see that, like, some of this stuff's come through the working group, and staff have taken their steer from there from the 9th of October meeting. I was looking through the slides, and then to council. While I think IT were aware that there was an overspend, there's been no committee oversight of potentially where that might come from, and we haven't had a report as a committee from the Land Drainage Working Group, I think, since the beginning of the term. And it says here that the working group reporting to the committee may work on land drainage matters more generally from time to time as directed by the committee to contribute to the committee's responsibilities to consider and report to council on the issues.
Yes, but you already heard that before this council was established, the decision was taken by council to spend money on Flockton. Right. It is Flockton, it is that decision that's coming back to us to increase the spend on it.
No, but I'm saying that the working group is giving the steer without any oversight of the committee, and the working group hasn't reported to the committee at all in the term, and it would be really good if that could start happening so that we could have that. No, it's in the terms of reference. I mean, it's the committee's responsibility, not the working group's responsibility.
Of the council in public, and I just want us to focus on getting the language of this correct.
Well, my point is that, sorry, I wasn't very clear, that it would have been really good if this had come through the ITE committee as a recommendation to council, because then a lot of this would have been dealt with at that stage, at the committee stage, in whichever format. Because the wording of things that we've been discussing now.
We'd still be having the same discussion.
But we would have, as a larger group of people, been able to go through where it might have come from and the whys and wherefores at that point.
Well, look, I don't want to have that argument right now. So what I want to do is to get a focus on the language of the resolution that enables us to actually know what was decided by this council. And I mean, I'm quite happy to defer it to next week if that would.
Writing something now.
Well, I mean, you know, you're going to have this exact same choice next week, which will be about whether we run over into Thursday, whether we run over into Friday, and whether we run over into Saturday. I've got every single day, and I'm not leaving this until all of the papers are passed by the end of the year.
Leanne, why don't you finish?
Yeah.
Why don't you finish the third resolution? And because I think
Yeah, but the next item is PX, so we could go into PX and come back and deal with it after PX.
yeah, because I think
All
we've
right.
had the main questions answered.
So you work on some wordings. Okay, so I'm just going to defer this item. And no, I'm not going to put it without some words written down. I'm sorry. But item 3 has got to be explicit. I'm not going to have us continue to pass resolutions which are then meaningless in the face of inquiry later on. So I'm going to move that we go into PX for all of the reasons set out on the agenda, and Andrew's going to second it, and I'll put that motion. All those in favour say aye. Aye. Those opposed say no. That's carried. This will not take very long.